Hello everyone, my name is Ashish and today we are going to build this digital clock in React using the Glassmorphism effect. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So here we have a blank React application, and what I have done till now is I have run npx create react app command. And I have got rid of all the unnecessary files. So I have this clean slate to start with. Now the first thing which we are going to do is to create a clock component. So let's do that. Here in the src folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'll name it clock.js like this. And in here, let's create a function. So we'll say const clock, and we'll create an arrow function like this, and we'll export default clock. Now, as you might be aware that in the new version of React, you don't need to write import React from React in every component. So that's why we can directly start with a function and we do not need to write import React from React. But we do need to import useState. So let's import that from React. So in here, I'll say import useState from React like this. And in here we are going to define a new state. So we'll say const time and set time is equal to useState, and here we'll initialize it with the current date and time. So for that we'll use new date like this. Now to get this on the browser, we need to return some JSX. So we'll say return, and here we are going to say a div. So we'll say div like this, and in here we are going to return the time like this. And if we refresh, nothing happens because we have not yet imported the clock component in our app component. So let's do that. Inside our app component, we'll say import clock from clock like this. And then inside the return statement here, we are going to say clock like this. And here we are getting the error that objects are not valid React child. This is because that this time is an object. To convert this into a string, we can do two local strings. So we'll say two local time string like this, and a function like this. And now you can see that we have the time on our browser. But to update it, we need to run a set interval that will keep updating it every second. So for that we can use effect. So here we are going to say use effect like this. And now let's create an effect. So here we'll say use effect, and what use effect does is it takes a function and a dependency array. So here first we'll create a function, and then we'll have the array like this. And inside the function, what we want to do is we want to run a set interval. So we are going to say const interval is equal to set interval and inside the set interval we'll have to pass a function. So like this, and then we have to give the time. So we have 1000 milliseconds. So I want this use effect to run every 1 second and then update the time. So here we'll remove this dependency array because we do not want it to depend on anything, and we want it to run every time the component renders, that is to run every second. Now in here we'll have some logic to update our time. So for that, let's create a function. So here we can create a function const update time, like this. We'll create an arrow function, and in here we will say set time new date, like this. Now inside the set interval we'll call the update time function. So here we'll say update time, like this. And now you can see that we have our time here on the screen. Now the next thing which we want to do is we want to clear this interval as well. So we'll have a cleanup function. The way we can add a cleanup function is we'll place a return statement, and we'll have a function here, and in here we will say clear interval, and here we'll give interval, like this. Now in a small application like this, whether you create a cleanup function or not, it doesn't matter, but we should always create a cleanup function whenever we are using use effect and we are setting things like set interval. Otherwise we may run into memory issues. Now the next thing which we want to do is we want to extract the hours, minutes and seconds from this date string. So we had the date object, and that was converted to string by this toLocalTimeString method, and now we want to extract the hours, minutes, seconds and this session. So for that, let's create a function. So we'll say const format time and I'm using an arrow function, like this, and in here we will accept a parameter t for time, and now we'll return t.split. Now when we use the split method, it splits the string into arrays, and we can define the separator and the limit. So I'm going to define the separator as regex. So in here we will say we will create a regex inside this, and here we'll say /s, like this, for the space, and then we will define a colon. So we want to separate at the colon and at the space. So if we separate at the colon, we'll get this hours, minutes and seconds, and if we separate at the space, we will get this AM or PM. So you can see that we have done this regex. If you're not aware about the regex, just copy this for now, and then you can later on search what is regex in JavaScript. Now after that, just to test this, let's call this format time function. So I'm going to call this format time function here, format time, like this, and we are going to pass this time.localTimeString inside the format time. Now as I told you that this format time will give us an array of all the hours, minutes and seconds, that is the string which will be split at the colons and the spaces. So here we can use 0 like this, and now you can see we should get 12. Similarly, if we just copy this, let's copy it and paste it 2 more times, like this. We need to add parenthesis. Okay, what wrong did we do? Okay, we need to enclose all of these elements in a fragment. So let's create a React fragment here, like this, and let's close it like this. You can also close it in a div, but I'm creating a fragment like this. Now if we write 1 and 2, and let's copy this one more time. So here we can like this or like this. Now you can see that we have got the hours, the minutes and the seconds, and at the end we have our AM or PM. So we have all the information which we need for our clock. Now let's add the CSS to create that Glassmorphism effect. So for that I'm going to use style components. So for that let's install style components in our project. So we'll say npm install styled components like this, and this will take a while and it will install the style components into our project. Now what we have to do is we have to import the style component. So we'll say import styled from style components like this. Now instead of defining these as div, we are going to first create a container. So here I'm going to say container, and let's define this container. So here we'll say const container is equal to styled dot div like this, and then we will add our template string. So 2 backticks and then semicolon, and inside the backticks we can write our CSS rules. So this is the way we use style components in our React project. We first install the style components, and then we imported style from style components, and then we are using that styled.div, and inside the template string we can write the CSS. So what we want to do here is we want to say the height is 100 VH. Let's set the display to flex. Let's set the flex direction to column, and we'll say justify content to center, and then we want to have line items to center, and we also want the color to a shade of white like this. Now you may not understand what I'm actually doing right now. We are just adding some CSS properties without knowing what we are doing. So let's see what exactly we are doing. So if you come onto our project, you can see that we can break this project into flexbox. So you can see that we have this here, and then we have this seconds, and then we have a div for our AM and PM. So we want to create a flexbox which should create this clock and then this date, and inside this whole clock we will have again a flexbox which will have these 3 components. So basically the hours and the minutes, the seconds and the AM or the PM. So this way we are creating. So first we'll have this whole container inside. So first we'll have this container, and inside the container we'll have this image, and inside the image we'll have this clock, and inside this clock we'll have all these elements. So whenever you're trying to create some layout, just break that layout into pieces, into small pieces, and then try to assemble it and try to think how it was built, and then you will be able to create that very easily. So we have this container right here which we have created. Okay, so let's get back to our code. So as I told you, inside the container we'll have this clock face. So let's create a clock face. So we'll say clock face like this. And now let's define the clock face. So we'll say const clock face is equal to styled dot div, and then we can have a template string like this, and in here we will define our CSS properties. So as I told you that our clock face is also a flex box that will hold this hours and minutes and the seconds and this AM or PM. So here we'll have display flex, and then we can give a padding of 2.5 rem. Actually, let me add these things inside the clock face so that you can see what is happening. So I'll add here like this, and now you can see the clock face here. So you have this 12 and 17, 12 AM. So that is here. Now let's give it a background. So we'll say background RGBA 0,0,0,0.6 like this. Now let's add a border. So we'll say border top to 2px solid 333, and then we can have border left as well. It will give a kind of shine to our glass. So again we can say solid 333 like this. Now we'll say text align to right. Now let's add a box shadow. So we'll say box shadow 20px 20px 50px RGBA 0,0,0 and 0.5 like this. That's cool. Let's add a border radius as well. So we'll say border radius to 10px. Now let's increase the width as well. So we'll say min width to 500 pixels like this. So that is it. We have created our clock face. Now what we want to do is we want to create this element, then this element, and then this element for AM and PM. Now let me tell you this, that this element is also having two elements here. So we have this hours and we have this minutes. So let's create all of this. So for that, inside we want the hours and the minutes to be inside one element. So let's add that to a style div. So here we are going to say div like this, and we will add the hours and the minutes inside this. So let's cut this from here and paste it here. Now let's define this div. So here we'll say const div is equal to styled dot div. Then we can define a template string, template literal, and there we go. And inside the div we are going to define some styles. So what we want inside the div is we want align self to center, and we also want to give a padding of 1 rem like this. That's cool. Now let's create a div for this seconds. So for that we will create seconds like this, and we will cut this and we'll paste it here. Again, let's define the seconds. So we'll say const seconds is equal to styled.div, and then we will have a template literal, and inside this template literal we are going to define our CSS styles, font size of 10 rem, and that's it for now. Now we also want to change the font size of these hours and minutes. For that, let's change this div to time. So here we'll say time like this, and again in here we'll say time like this. Now let's define this time. So we'll say const time is equal to time like this, time is equal to styled.div we want to set the font size to 5 rem like this. Now let's change the CSS of this AM and PM. So for that we will change this div to session like this. Now let's define the session. So in here we will say const session is equal to styled.div a template literal, and then inside the template literal we are going to say font size is 1.5 rem. Then we can set align self to center. So the basic style of our clock is coming up. Now the time is shifted to left. So let me see. So inside the clock face, what we can do is we can do justify content to center like this. And now we have everything in the center. Now what we want is we want to display the date here as well. So as you can see here, we have this date here. So let's create a new style div and let's name it date container. So we'll say date container like this. And inside the date container, we will start our curly braces to enter our JavaScript. And here we'll say time dot to date string. So what this does is it takes the time. So this is our time. So the time is the date. Now from the date object, it converts it to the date string, which looks like this. So this will automatically convert our date object to this date string. So let's define this date container and see that in action. So here we are going to say const date string or date container. Date container is equal to styled.div, and then we can have a template literal like this. If we save it, you can see that we got our date here. Now let's add some CSS styles. So here we are going to say font size to 2 rem. Then we can have the position to absolute. Then we'll have left to 50%. We'll also have transform translate x to minus 50%. We are doing this to get the date in the center of our card or the glass which we are creating. like this, and we'll have the bottom to 0 like this. Now you can see that the date is here at the bottom, but we want it to be at the bottom of the card. So for that, what we can do is we can add a position property to our clock face. So if we say position relative like this, and now you can see that our date is at the bottom of the card. If you're not clear about how position works, you can watch my video on CSS positions and you will be very clear. And now you can see that our clock is coming up in shape. So now let's add a padding as well. So we'll add a padding of say 1 rem like this. And you can see that we have the basic layout of our clock in shape. Now let's add a background, the Glassmorphism effect and the tilt effect, which you can see here. So to create the tilt effect, you need to add a package that is vanilla tilt. So here we'll say npm install vanilla tilt like this. Now once it is installed, you need to create a new component and we'll name it tilt.js like this. So here we'll say import vanilla tilt from vanilla tilt like this. We also want to import the use effect and the use ref hook. So we'll say import use effect and use ref like this from React. Now we'll say const tilt. Let's create an arrow function. And let's also export this. So we'll say export default tilt like this. Now this tilt component will take options prop. So here we'll destructure the props and we'll say options, and we can also pass other props like class names or other things. So for that we'll spread rest of the rest of the props which we'll get. So like this. Now here what we need to do is we need to initialize the tilt library. So what we'll do is first we'll create a use ref. So we'll create const tilt is equal to use ref, and let's initialize it with null. Okay, this should be capital R like this. Now let's create a use effect, and here we will say vanilla tilt dot init, and then we need to pass the ref which we created. So we'll say tilt dot current and also the options which we are getting as props. So options like this. Now let's return some JSX. So what we are going to return is, we'll say return. So we'll return a div with ref equal to tilt and the rest of the props. So we can say rest like this. Now let's import this tilt in our clock.js. So here what we are going to do is we are going to import tilt from tilt like this. Now the next thing which we are going to do is we need to wrap this clock face into tilt. So here we are going to say tilt like this, and let's grab it from here and let's keep it here. Now we need to pass some options to this tilt. If you're wondering where we can get these options, so you can just write vanilla tilt like this, and here you can see that we have vanilla tilt.js on GitHub pages, and if you click on this, you can see that here we have all the options which we can use. So this options will be an object with all of these key value pairs. So let's create this. So here we can say const options like this, and here we want to set the scale to 1.05. Then we want to set the speed to 1000. Then we want the max angle to 10 degrees, and then we want the glare to true. You can see all of these properties here. So this is the glare I'm using, glare to true, and if we have the glare, we'll set the max glare like this. We'll set the max glare to 0.1, and that's it. Now we need to pass this options into tilt, so we'll say options is equal to options like this. Now if we go back to our React application, if we hover over this, you can see that we are getting the tilt effect, and that is awesome. Now the next thing which we have to do is we have to create a background. For that, let's go to the app.js, and in here, instead of returning this usual div, we will create a style div. So we'll say import styled from style components like this, and instead of this div we can have a style div. Let's define it here. So we'll say const div is equal to styled dot div. Then we can have our template literals, and inside the template literal we are going to define our CSS styles. So here we'll set the background URL. So we'll say background, and we'll set it to URL, and I'm going to copy and paste the URL because I've already selected the image. But if you want to use any other image, what you can do is you can go to Unsplash, or basically you can go to source.unsplash.com. So you can say source.unsplash.com like this, and there you can find the instructions. Okay, sorry, I did a typo, so let's write source unsplash like this, and this is the website source.unsplash.com, and if you click here you can see that you have the instructions to get the images. So you can see that we have we can get the images from a specific user, you can get the random images from a user's likes, from a collection, or a fixed daily or weekly photo, or a random search term. So you can use any of those. I'm using this specific photo, so I have this specific photo, this ID here. So basically we have this source.unsplash.com / the ID of the photo which I want to use. So that is how I'm using this URL. Now let's go back to the application. Now we also need to specify some more things. We need to specify the height. So let's specify the height to 100 bh like this, and let's set the width to 100%, and we also want to say background size, to cover, and background position to center, like this. Now if you refresh our application, you can see that we are getting this image, and in here we have this card and we are getting the tilt effect, and it is already looking very awesome. Now the next thing which we want to do is we want to add the Glassmorphism effect. For that, what we are going to do is we are going to go to our clock.js, and inside this tilt component we are going to add a class. So we'll say class name is equal to blur. Now let's create this blur class. Now you can create this blur class inside a CSS file, or I'm using the index.css file which I have already. So we'll say .blur, and what I'm going to do here is we are going to say backdrop filter, and we'll set it to blur 5px, like this. And now if you refresh it, you can see that we are getting this beautiful glass effect. And you can also see that we have a bit of glare because we have set the glare property. And now let's change some fonts. So let's go to the Google font. Let's close these tabs and we'll go to Google Fonts. So Google Fonts, and in here we will search for Bungee. So we'll say Bungee here, and we want the Bungee outline, or let's take this Bungee inline. And we also want this Bungee shade. So let's select this style as well. And we also want Iceland. So search for Iceland. You can use whatever font you want, but I have already selected some of these fonts for you. So we'll select this Iceland. Now let's click here and let's go to the import statement. We'll select all of this like this. Let's import it in our index.js file like this. Now inside the clock.js, what we can do is we can add, let's go back to our React app. Now for the hour and the minute, we can add a font family. So here in the time div, let's add a font family of Iceland. So how do we select that? Here. So let's copy this and let's paste it here like this. And you can see that the font has changed. Similarly, we will also change the font of this date. So in the date container, we'll add the font family like this. And for the seconds, we want the Bungee shade. So we'll copy this from here, and inside the seconds, let's add the font family. And now check our React application. Now for the session, we will use the Bungee inline. So let's copy this as well. And let's go to the session div and here paste it like this. And that is super awesome. So I hope you enjoyed creating this React clock with the Glassmorphism effect. So Glassmorphism is this new trend in the UI design. So I hope you like it. If you like it, smash the like button. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I keep bringing these React videos regularly. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.